What's up, everybody? It's Charles. Today, taking your questions on replacing pistons, lack of dipsticks, buying a Mark V, and more. This is episode 259 of the HumbleMechanic podcast. All right, hope you guys are all doing awesome today. Remember, if you want to get a question on a show like this, email me, charles@humblemechanic.com. Put question for Charles in that subject line. Ask your question at the top. Hit the enter button a few times, then give me the details. That helps out a ton when going through all the emails that I get. Also, these videos and many other ones are available in audio-only format on iTunes, Stitcher, Google, and of course over at HumbleMechanic.com. All right, let's talk about the sponsor of the day, which is CRP Automotive. CRP deals in a ton of OE maintenance and repair parts, timing belt kits, suspension components, and even fluids. In fact, they make the factory DSG fluid for Volkswagen and Audi. So check them out at crpautomotive.com. And real quick, if you like the show, want to throw some support, but more importantly, score discounts to places like Black Forest, Eastwood, MT Knives, Sonic Tools, Adams Polishes, Kerma TDI, Scanner, Danner, and a whole bunch more, check out that crew membership program. As always, links to that and everything else we're going to talk about today are down in the description. So that's wrapped up. Let's hit these questions. First one up. Love the EA888 work you've got going. If you guys haven't seen that teardown video of the 2-liter turbo, it's pretty good. I highly recommend it. I'll be sure to link that up. My question is fairly typical. Every shop I've asked about piston replacement has said that they will have to remove the head to do it. I want to know if it's possible to do the job exclusively from the underside, or is there something I'm missing? I figure simply locking the cams and reinstalling the crank, observing the position would be enough. Good question. Love the idea of thinking about things in a different way than the repair manual would walk you through step by step. But flat out, I don't think it's gonna work. And even if it does work, for some crazy reason it works, I think you're gonna spend way more time and energy doing it from the bottom than you ever would from the top. Couple of things we wanna talk about. You mentioned reinstalling the crankshaft, which means we're removing the crankshaft. Well, in order to do that, we're going to be pulling the transmission out because we're going to need to disconnect or unbolt either the flex plate if it's an automatic or the flywheel if it's a DSG or if it's a manual transmission. So we're pulling the trans out already. Now we're doing more work than I think just slapping the head off, doing the work, and then putting it back on. In addition to that, you're probably not going to be able to compress the piston rings properly in order to shove them into the cylinder and get them dialed in correctly that way. So if you didn't take the crankshaft out, you're having to work around it. I don't think that's gonna even happen. I don't think you'd be able to sneak the piston out around the crankshaft. I could be wrong there, but remember, it's not just removing, we have to reinstall it. And working with pistons and piston rings can be a little bit of a delicate scenario. You guys may remember back when I did the VR6 engine, I broke 2 piston rings trying to get them, I forget if it was over the piston or simply into the engine. It may have been either one. I don't really remember, sort of blocked that out of my memory, but plain and simple, it's probably not going to work on this particular engine. Now, there may be other engines that works on, but for your EA888, which is the 4-cylinder, turbocharged, chain-driven engines, it ain't gonna happen. And if it does, right, if there's that one dude out there that says, yeah, you can do it that way, no problem, it still feels like to me it's gonna be way more work than just pulling the cylinder head. And you're not saving any money because you're gonna have to buy bolts, you're gonna have to buy sealant, you're still gonna have to do the replacement of the work. Take the head off. It's not hard to take the head off on one of those. You guys saw how fast we did it on the EA888 that I pulled apart. Of course, it's probably gonna take you a little bit longer than it did in the video because I was able to cut and high speed some stuff where required, but flat out, I don't think it's gonna work. If you have done it this way and it's 100 times easier, drop it down in the comments and let us know, but I don't see any benefit to doing it that way. Even if you could, I don't see any benefit to it. Even taking your time and not being super familiar with that engine, in 3 hours, give or take, maybe 4 hours at the most, you can have that cylinder head sitting on the bench, do your pistons, and then put it back together. New head gasket, new head bolts, new chain tensioner, do all the work, and I think you're gonna be just fine. Of course, you're gonna need a new head gasket, new head bolts, new chains, new chain tensioner. I'd put the guides on it if you're going that far too. Depending on what car you're actually talking about, piston replacement in the VW world is not as common as Audi. Audi A4, Q5, the longitudinal engines are very, very common. They had the wrong pistons in there. They did it for fuel economy, and well, that didn't work out so well. So Good question. Again, I love that thinking outside the box, but this one I don't think is going to work exactly the way you got it planned. All right, next one up is from Ryan. I got an '08 A6. Problem that I'm having with it is that air only comes from the passenger side footwell vents, front and back. There's no air coming from any other vents in the car, even when I change the direction of air distribution. Any pointers on what the problem could be? Could it be electrical, or could there be something physically lying in the box stopping the air from flowing through the rest of the car? P.S. It's got dual zone climate control. Thanks for your help, Ryan. Ryan, first thing I would look at, make sure their pollen filter's not clogged. That's a very real thing that it could be. So we know a couple of things based on what you've told us. We know the blower motor's working. It's doing something because we have air out of a vent. So good. We don't have a completely dead motor. A lot of times what happens with these is one of the blend door motors fails, or two, maybe three, maybe one failed and you didn't notice it, and then a second one failed and you didn't notice it because maybe you don't ever really set it on that setting all that often. Maybe, 3 times a month you set it on there, so it could have been broken or failed for quite a while. Now that third motor is bad, and we now are experiencing where we can't adjust our distribution. Let's say you brought this car to me. This would be my process for going through diagnosing this problem. Step 1, always verifying what's going on. So I'd walk out there. I wouldn't touch anything other than turning the air conditioning or heat or fan on full blast and see what I got. This vent, down here, over here. Then what I would do is I would see where you had everything positioned. Do you have it positioned to feet? Okay, cool. Let's roll it to face. Let's roll it to defrost and see what happens. Then I would do this very key thing. I would make sure that those face vents aren't closed, because Lord knows what could happen there. Maybe you got a kid that was playing in the car and she closed all the vents where the air actually won't come out of the vents for the dash, but it'll reroute it back out to the feet or something like that. Next, what I would do is I would grab my scan tool, I would plug it in, I would scan for faults. Maybe you just have a couple of bad blend door motors, which is not horribly uncommon at all. If you don't have any faults, the next thing I would do is I would run the basic setting on the system. And that's gonna take each door, each motor, it's gonna move it to full open, full closed, or full hot, full cold. It's gonna sweep the door through its entire position and read what it does. After that, I'm gonna go back and check the faults and see if I have any fault codes, and then I'm going to retest the system and see what I got. Odds are you're gonna find that either you got a fault, or when you run that basic setting, that full door sweep, the doors aren't sweeping, or you have something mechanically blocking airflow, like a clogged pollen filter, or maybe there's a rat's nest under there, right? It could be 150,000 different things that are blocking that airflow. Take a little bit of a step back, treat it like it was your buddy's car and he said, hey Ryan, man, can you look at my air conditioning real quick? The vent distribution seems weird. He's probably not gonna call it that, but it doesn't feel like it's blowing out of the right vents. And approach it that way and see what you get. I know there's a ton of people out there that say, no, new car technicians can't do anything without a scan tool. They don't know what they're doing. Having to get a scan tool just to work on a car is dumb. All that may be true, but it doesn't matter, because you really do need a scan tool to work on modern cars. Even doing an oil change, which we'll talk about in a minute, you really do need a scan tool. So it's worth the $350 or whatever it costs today, $500 for VCDS, for VACCOM, to have if you're going to be a DIYer. I can't stress enough, you really do need some kind of equipment, bi-directional, which means we can talk to it and we can make it do stuff, scan tool to work on the cars. Otherwise, you're just gonna be rolling the dice or loading up that parts cannon, right? Loading up the parts cannon and blasting parts on it, rather than taking your time and having a good solid diagnostic approach to what the problem is. All right, next one up is from Larry. I got a deal on an '07 Jetta 2.5 liter Wolfsburg for $4,000 with 60,000 miles on it. That's awesome, good mileage, not a terrible price so far. It has a headliner issue present and the transmission slips a little bit. I wanna know if it's a good deal and if the Wolfsburg is any different and what problems I'll be facing using it as a daily driver. Thanks. All right, Larry, so you already bought it, so whether I think it's a good deal or not doesn't really matter. But let's talk about this car a little bit. The Mark V, I think the '08 and forward is a bit better than the '07. I wanna say the '07 was the 150 horsepower, the '08 was the 180 horsepower. There were some other changes as the Mark V got a little bit newer. It's a decent car. I worry, the headliner, I don't care, right? It's annoying because it's hanging down like on your head or in the back passenger and the lights are all blocked. My Passat has the same issue. It's actually a pretty affordable thing to fix, even if you don't want to fix it yourself. I think our headliner guy charged like $350 to recover the headliner, and he did a really good job. And that was him pulling the headliner out, recovering it. You're gonna need to replace the harness if you do this because it's just a ribbon cable that super sucks. And almost always when you're pulling it off the old headliner or manipulating it in some way, the cable is probably gonna rip. Even if it doesn't come clean apart, the connections were super weak. So get a ribbon cable, it's $60 or whatever. It's gonna be well worth that $60 to not have to take it down and do it a second time. So the headliner issue, no big deal. The trans slipping is the one I worry about. You know, this is probably a valve body issue. Valve body issues on that generation car were incredibly common. That's probably one of the most common repairs on the MK5 Jetta is going to be valve body issues. And we were putting valve bodies in 5 or 6 a week. We were doing them all the time back 09, 10, 11, way back then. So that's probably what the problem is. Of course, before you put a $3,000 valve body in it, check your fluid level, make sure that it's the correct fluid. It's probably worth dropping the pan, putting a new filter in it, doing a full fluid exchange, and seeing what you get. Sometimes just a little bit low, and it's not that big of a deal. Other issues you might run into on the MK5 is going to be valve cover failure, which we've talked about, vacuum pump leaking, which is really common and a very easy DIY. I got a video on that. Door latch failures, door harness failures, thermostats are somewhat common. Rear brakes wearing out quick are really common. 30,000 miles on a set of rear brakes, you know, and then being worn out and having to be replaced, that's pretty common. Headlights and taillights going out, super duper common. Rollers wearing out in the serpentine belt circuit, which drives the water pump, that's pretty common. Vehicle electrics modules having issues and the relay sockets getting weak and worn out, that's pretty common too. Ignition switch failure here and there is not uncommon either. It's not a terrible car. You know, for $4,000 on a 12-year-old car, it's not bad. 60,000 miles is pretty low. I always get a little uncomfortable when the miles are too low on a regular car, not, you know, a special edition or some high performance car on a regular car, which means it probably wasn't driven all that much. Clearly, that's what that means. So I would go through this car step by step by step. I'd do a brake fluid service. I'd do an oil change. I'd put all new filters in it, make sure the tires are good. I'd do that transmission service we talked about, do a thorough inspection on it, find all the problems, write up your estimate, and then prioritize. Okay, rear brakes being metal to metal, very important. A little bit of an oil leak, not super important. The door locks, not locking the driver's door, I don't know. Maybe that's not important to you because you park in the garage all the time. Maybe it is. You'll have to decide that for yourself. But the big one here really to me is the transmission issue. Again, I'd get new, clean, fresh fluid in it. I don't remember if in 07 they had a service interval. I know they didn't for the longest time. Then they added it and they pulled it out of some cars. I don't care if it's got it or not. I'd get fresh, clean fluid in it. Be 100% sure you are using the correct fluid. I can't stress that enough because they get very fussy when you don't use the right fluid. So Larry, great question. Congrats on the new to you ride. Hopefully just a couple minor things to fix and your car will be good to go for quite some time. All right, last one of the day is from Craig. I have a 2014 A4 2-liter turbo. Finally, some designer with a brain. Craig, this is awesome. A designer with a brain positioned the oil filter at the top of the engine for quick and easy access. The same genius decided to eliminate the dipstick and sub in a plug instead for car computer check on the oil level. This is stupid. What happens if the computer malfunctions? That's a good question. What does happen if the computer malfunctions? Anyway, Craig went to ECS Tuning and bought a custom designed dipstick that works perfectly. I love the extraction mode. Yes, I find that only 95% of the oil is extractable, but I don't see it as a big deal as you have performed the majority of your oil replacement anyway. I use 100% synthetic and replace oil every 5K, so 95% of my oil is fresh every 5K. The convenience of the extractor is easy as pie, takes about 40 minutes, would never go back to drain plug, and thanks to Audi designer for the easy access oil filter and for the custom dipstick. Okay, so Craig didn't really have a question, but it's an interesting comment. You are going to continue to see things like dipsticks go away. Why is that? In the one hand, it makes no sense to me. A sensor is probably not cheaper than a dipstick. But here's the thing. most people don't check their oil anyway. So look at it from the perception of your average customer, right? Most of us, me, you guys watching this, are car folks. We care about our car. So we do things like check our oil every other fill up or once a week or whatever it is. Most customers, they get in, they take their key, they put it in the ignition or they hit the start button and they drive it. So until something pops up right in their face, they're not going to pay attention to it. Where this becomes a problem is for folks like Craig that do their own oil changes or technicians where they go to grab the dipstick and go, oops, there isn't one. There's just a tiny little plug. Oh, let me start it up and warm it up for 5 minutes and wait for the indicator to read correctly. So if you're a technician and you're working on cars that don't have dipsticks, whether it's engine oil or transmission fluid, because gee, when's the last time a VW had a dipstick for the transmission? What you can do is a couple of things. You can make your own with just a calibrated stick. You can buy one from another model. So Craig's got, what did he say, a 14. Maybe that 2013 engine had the dipstick and it's the same length. Maybe it's a little longer or a little shorter and you can sort of calibrate it and throw an etched mark on it or a scratch on the dipstick so you know where the level is going to be. Or you can buy something like an adjustable one on Amazon. They're super cheap and you just set the adjustment to the right height, drop it in, pull it out, okay, it's good, and then you store it up, you know, on the shelf or something like that. So I feel Craig's frustration. On the one hand, the oil filter is super easy. On the other hand, the dipstick is a pain in the butt, or I should say the lack of dipstick is a pain in the butt. I also feel like that oil fill hole is way smaller than it really should be. There's funnels, specialty funnels that fit that to make it quite a bit easier to fill the oil. You know, since we're nitpicking things, I would throw the tiny, tiny oil fill hole on one of those things that are annoying. On the extractor thing, I actually like that. I think for the most part, that's how VW Audis are designed today, is for the oil to be extracted out rather than the drain plug opened. And like Craig said, if you don't get all the oil, is it really that big of a deal? Well, probably not. And you're not going to get all the oil out anyway. And if you're taking it in for service, I promise you they're not waiting 40 minutes for all that oil to drain. They're taking the drain plug out, they're letting it drain till it's drip, 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 or a small steady stream, and they're putting the drain plug back in. So you're probably getting roughly the same amount of engine oil out anyway. This might actually make for a very interesting video to see how much is left when you do the extraction method versus the drain plug method. For me, if I had one of these cars, you bet I would be extracting it, especially if I'm doing it myself at home. In fact, on the Touareg that we have, the diesel, it's a pain in the butt to do an oil change because the drain plug is right above the subframe. There's enough room to get it out pretty easily, but when the oil comes out, it hits the subframe and just splatters everywhere. So you're either putting something over the subframe to prevent that, or you're making a giant mess and using a ton of cans of brake clean to clean it up, or you're extracting it from the top, which again is the method I prefer. My Touareg, by the way, does not have a dipstick either. I'll probably get one for it at some point, but then if I keep it in there, I have to modify the engine cover, so maybe more work than I'm willing to do. But Craig, you're totally right. Thumbs up for the oil filter, thumbs down on the no dipstick. But again, that is the direction that we're moving. And you know what, who cares? In like 5 minutes, all cars are going to be electric anyway, and they're not going to have internal combustion engines, so you don't need a dipstick. Maybe that's why they're doing it, to get you used to not looking for it, but most people don't look for it anyway. So good call on adding your own dipstick to your vehicle, Craig. I think that's something that a lot of folks do and something I've also looked into as well. I'll probably do the calibrated one just so that I can use it for multiple things other than just our Touareg engine oil. All right, guys, I'm gonna wrap it up there. Questions, comments, you know what to do. If you like the video, hit that thumbs up button. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching, or if you're listening, thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you again next time.